Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds in 2009. Here is the Blu-ray, and yes, we are back with another Tarantino review. Of course, this week, basically all over this last week, and including going up to Friday, a lot of Tarantino films, I think, and then it'll just be The Hateful Eight that will be left to review. Probably be doing that in January, beginning of January, because I have, because of the Christmas period and stuff, I have better films planned, you could say, than The Hateful Eight. I do love the film, but I think just some films that aren't as well Tarantino films that I want to watch after Django, which we'll watch on Friday. And yes, Inglourious Basterds, of course, is before that, and it's 2009. This film, it's very very popular. Even even critically, I think it's more popular at times than the Kill Bill films. Of course, Death Proof. And yes, it was known as a kind of return to form after Death Proof, and I think I reviewed, of course, Death Proof. I thought it was a good film, actually. I don't think it's bad, and some people call it a really awful film. Not for me. I think it's definitely his worst, but it's still a good film, very impressive. And yeah, I think this, is a return, yes, to his greatness. That is the rest of his career. And actually for me, a return to masterful form. I think this is a masterpiece, and I first saw it. It must have been after Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and yeah, I think this was the third Tarantino that I saw. Because then I saw Django, just after it came out, and then I saw Kill Bill, The Hateful Eight, and then Jackie Brown, all the way through. So yeah, and then now Death Proof. That's the kind of ordering of how I watched Tarantino's for the first time. This film, I just came in from school one day and I just watched it, and I'd been meaning to see it for a while. Tarantino, obviously, I'd already seen Reservoir and Pulp and absolutely loved them. And then this came along and I absolutely adored it. I was blown away, and actually it was very very close. On first viewing to Reservoir Dogs, and I think actually after multiple watches I can say that for me it's even better than Reservoir Dogs. I think yes, it's not in my top three favourites, but it is for me one of the best films ever made. I think this is a mind-blowing thing, and yes, it's kind of a very very comical, and it's not meant to be taken seriously at times, especially in the final act, although it's very very moving in the final act, because of course it's a fictionalized version of what what would happen with Nazi Germany. This is Nazi occupied France, basically in World War Two. And yes, it kind of it tells two different kind of stories, two different plots to kind of overthrow, the leadership of Nazi, occupied France and Germany. One of the plots is kind of carried out by Shoshana, played by Mélanie Laurent, and she basically, the very opening scene, she's one of the people that get away from, Christoph Waltz's character of Hans, basically brutally murdering all of her family and stuff, and yeah, basically she gets away, and when you see her actual storyline, it is a few years later, and yeah, it's kind of a revenge there she's trying to get, and then you've got Lieutenant Aldo Rain, he's basically Brad Pitt, of course, and he's trying to do something as well. And yeah, basically, it kind of intertwines with some stuff, Diane Kruger's character, Michael Fassbender, you've got many appearances, small appearances from other actors as well, Mike Myers, and as well Rod Taylor, which is very very rare to see him in a film. I think he was an amazing actor. The Birds especially, it was amazing. Loved him, and it's great to see him, in a very very small role. But yes, basically, this film is a fictionalized version of many historical events, and it's kind of what would happen if it went this way, an alternative take. Because it's Tarantino, of course it's a comedy. All these films are in some way a comedy, and he kind of just, it's a satisfying film again. What he kind of does with these sort of things. And it's a comedy, and it's a very very moving film at times, and as well, it's got kind of a romance that happens very very complex. Maybe not both way romance, but it really is such a compelling one. And I think Daniel Brühl as well, he is great in the film. And when I first saw this, I was drawn in by this opening scene. It is a masterpiece of tension, atmosphere, and acting. I think Christoph Waltz, of course, he plays the character of Hans, and he's basically, you could say, the villain of the film. Basically, he's one of the ones that shows up throughout the film the most, and he is constantly a threat, but also a very very. It's kind of a comedy role. He's charming and all this kind of stuff, but he is a ruthless guy, and of course, the opening scene. When I saw this, I was just wowed. The way that Tarantino is able to kind of sustain the tension, and just the subtext, and the dramatic irony that is used in many many different scenes in the film. But the opening one, it really sets the tone, and then you've got, and it's about 20 minutes really, the opening, you could say. Then you've got a transition to what happens with the Bastards early on, this group of soldiers led by Brad Pitt, and as well, you've got the Bear Jew, Eli Roth plays, and it's just amazing what they do there. But yes, the Bastards are this group who basically go around killing and scalping Nazis, in the film. So it's it's kind of a very very ruthless film. This is a violent film, and the violence in this film is brilliant. For me, I think it's, once again, like Tarantino style, is amazing, and it is stylized at times. You could say actually the shooting and everything is very very similar to actually what Django would be. But Django's a bit more excessive, but this one is very similar to that in the way that it stages everything, and the shootouts. There's obviously a lot more slow motion and everything in Django. But yes, this one, I think the shootouts are amazing. The gore, just all the action in the film is stunning, and the dialogue, once again, genius dialogue. I think particularly in this film, it's more about the tension than the references and all this kind of stuff, and the kind of the kind of maybe you could say at times it's less Tarantino than a lot of the other ones in his dialogue, but again, it's kind of the usual standards you'd expect from Tarantino, in terms of how amazing the dialogue is, and how kind of just how compelling it is, how genius it is, and it has got some references in there, of course, but it's not the usual stuff that he would reference, because of course this film is set in World War II, so it's not stuff as much in pop culture that he'd reference in a lot of his other films. And of course, with Django and in Hateful Eight, he carried on with this kind of in this vein. But yes, it's just amazing. I think this film as well has so much culture in it. The settings, just the cast of characters, and all the subtitle stuff. It's so amazing. I think just the atmosphere and the tone of this, and the kind of beauty of it, and also the tragedy of it. It's so well done. I think the use of music, well, absolutely amazing, as always with Tarantino. Less so Death Proof, but yes, this film, of course, has more Morricone stuff in there, and it's got some tracks he actually used already in Kill Bill, the Kill Bill films. So yeah, he's got that in there, but it's used in different ways, and all the music used in this film is masterful. It is so good. Especially the surrender, and Amico, towards the end. All these pieces are just epic. The first sort of 40 minutes of this, you could say it elevates the most until maybe the ending, finale to this, because it's just so, the way that Tarantino in this first 40 minutes and in the final act uses music consistently, and just his cinema, just the way he stages the scenes, the intensity of it, the kind of just how in tune he is with the music, the use of music here, the way he kind of builds the sequences, they build and build, and just how epic it is. I think if it had been to this heights, throughout the entire film, it would have been even better. But as it is, it's really a perfect film. I think what he does with this film, with everything, is just masterful. I think the characters are so good, so enjoyable. The character of Shoshana, she's so good. She's got so much depth. Kind of the weight, of what happens at the beginning, is carried throughout the rest of the film, and it adds so many different, difficulties for her. I'm not going to get into it too much, but of course, what happens with her and Christoph Waltz's character of Hans. wow, I think the dramatic irony once again, but just the tension between the two, and if you, just the tension, the atmosphere there, and the kind of the emotional resonance it has, and then of course her character just has such an amazing arc, and it's good. This film's a tragedy. It's a beautiful film at times, and it's a kind of a satire, a comedy, on many different events, and kind of a, yeah, you could say revenge elements again put in there, and kind of satisfying stuff that Tarantino does on these different events. Of course, the obvious, being, but yeah, basically, I think the cinematography as well, it's just genius really for this film. The way he kind of the action scenes, but just the way he kind of frames everything, especially the early on scene as well. When you've got the kind of there's kind of an emphasis at first. He kind of holds a shot on the window in the house, and you see kind of the soldiers outside, and it's just what he does there. He frames what he plays around with the kind of layers to the cinematography and therefore to the scene. You've got background tension and kind of intrigue, and then you've got the stuff going on in the foreground and the kind of this whole chamber box scene, and then you've got more revealed, of course, under the floorboards as the scene goes on. It's just what he does is kind of like movements, and I think the middle of the film, there's kind of some briefing scenes and stuff, but really most of this film is kind of it's done in an operatic way, and kind of staged in such a way, in sequences, sustained sequences, and it all feels like this, big journey, this epic film. It's got its emotional moments. It's hilarious. This film, it's epic in every sense, and it's just so geniusly written. I love as well, the kind of Daniel Brühl's character. What happens with him involving the cinema? Of course, the character of Shoshana has kind of she basically runs a cinema, and of course he wants to get one of his films shown, regarding his feats, in particular battles, and of course what happens there is amazing. It's so compelling, and there's different comments on cinema as well. Some cinema talk in there. Love that involving Chaplin. So yeah, I just think all the dialogue is riveting. It's so well written, and kind of it's just the tension within the dialogue and the situations that arise. The kind of the tension, especially with Christoph Waltz's character, is just so good. And of course, Christoph Waltz, he won 2 Oscars. Think about this: 2 Oscars within a few years for Best Supporting Actor, and both of them are Tarantino films. 2 films after, right next to each other in Tarantino's filmography. 2 supporting, roles, and 2 very, very opposite roles. In Django, of course, he's my favourite character in Django. I can't wait to review that. But I think he's kind of this warm, innocent character. Really, the kind of the goodest guy in the film, if you know what I mean. And then in this, he is really the villain of the film in terms of actual, main characters. Of course, you can't really count the other, obvious ones, that are kind of, they're not really characters in the film. But yeah, I think this character of Hans is just one of the best villains in cinema. And, of course, in Django, it is completely opposite, and, equally just as good in many ways, better. We'll get to that. But yes, Inglourious Basterds, the way this has been edited, shot, directed to perfection, it's very linear, once again. Not all of his films are, of course, non-linear, but this one, yeah, it's told in a kind of in order, and it's just so effective, though. I think the way that he kind of mounts up the tension, he sustains various scenes of dialogue and everything, and then it leads to these big outbursts of action. It's just genius the way he does it. I think of course the whole kind of half an hour sequence, Michael Fassbender, of course Diane Kruger, all this stuff here as well in the middle of the film. Wow, that's just the first time I saw it, I could not believe what was going on. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and of course you knew something was going to go wrong from the outset, but just the way that it unfolds, it's so amazing. It's compelling, throughout the entire film. this film is a masterpiece for me. It's among the best films of all time. It's not one of the best, very very best like Pulp Fiction or for me Kill Bill, and yeah. But yeah, basically, it is among the best films of all time. I think it's in my top 150 at the moment. And yes, I do prefer it to Reservoir Dogs. Actually, yeah, I think it's even better. And I'd give it the same rating of 100% plus tier 2. This film is mind blowing. It's just gotten better and better every time, and it's got a really, really just a kind of wonderful kind of emotional resonance in moments. The whole arc of kind of Shoshana, and what goes on there, is so moving and kind of inspirational and everything. And yeah, I think the opening scene couldn't have been better, and it carries on being flawless for me throughout the entire film. It has been criticised, in various areas. The final act, people have criticised as well. I think the final act is one of the best in cinema. I think it's haunting. It kind of the way every single storyline is wrapped up. The tragedy of it all, but also the kind of satisfaction of it all, and just the way that it is a visual treat. In every sense. It's builds and builds, and then you've got the final kind of link back as well. Just perfect for me. This film, has actually now been called one of the very, very top 3 maybe Tarantino's in rankings. I wouldn't quite agree with that, but it is a masterpiece, and I think definitely one of the best films of all time for me. And I kind of agree with the kind of IMDb kind of rating there. The placement. I think this is an absolute masterpiece. The cinematography, the direction in general, the editing, the music. Mostly the Morricone tracks used. Could not have been better. It makes it epic and kind of just very, very moving. The performances are all perfect for me. Even the minor characters and the kind of supporting roles, it's just all amazing. Even just Michael Fassbender as well. I think is amazing in the film, and just the comedy of it, the kind of how epic it is, and also at times very, very moving. It's got everything, this film, and I think just as a whole film, it is just a truly epic, amazing film from Tarantino. It's directed to perfection, and for me, I love what he does with it, and he kind of doesn't hold back. He goes all out with this film, but it never feels out of control. Especially very, very sustained sequence, moments within big sequences. This film, you could say, it's kind of got you could say 5 really big sequences, or 6, and that's really the kind of structure of the film. It's kind of just very, very contained at times within these parts, but it still feels like a big epic, and kind of has different threads going on, but they kind of they intertwine, they wrap up, and they come together perfectly for me. And yes, Inglourious Basterds, another masterpiece from Tarantino. So yeah, next up, of course, is Django Unchained. I can't wait to talk about this. Wonderful steelbook as well. So yeah, see what I kind of I think of that. If you've seen my reviews, you'll probably know. You'll kind of gauge my kind of thoughts on that, and yeah, you can kind of maybe see. I've hinted at different things, but do I prefer this to Inglourious Basterds? You'll have to find out, and I can't wait to review that. That'll be Friday, so the review will be up on Saturday. And yes, of course, as well, I watched The Happening yesterday, and that'll be up in the next few days. Just trying to figure out my rating, but it's a like from me. I do really like the film, and it is not a good film, but I really enjoyed the film, and it's one of them, as I've said before, that it's very, very enjoyable. But it's a bad film. But yes, thanks for watching my review, and of course, Tarantino just once again just knocking it out of the park. All the criticism for this film, once again, I don't agree with, and everyone has their own opinions, but for me, it's another masterpiece. I loved everything about the film. It's moving, it's poetic, it's tragic, it's constantly compelling, and masterfully directed. The tension, the use of tension is just some of the best in cinema, and it just culminates to one of the best final acts ever. And yes, one of my favourite. It will be very hard to knock it out of my top 250. So yeah, when I do my list, maybe in a year or so on YouTube, of my 500 favourites, this will probably still remain in the top 250. So yes, thanks for watching my review of Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds.